There's not much I haven't heard. When I began my chaplaincy residency at Hazelden, which is now the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation for Alcohol and Drug Addiction, one of my duties was to listen to patients' fifth steps. And at that time, Hazelden was a program focused primarily just on 12-step recovery. Patients who were admitted to the 30-day program, remember when it was 30 days? People had? But the patients were encouraged to write out all of their missteps, mistakes, errors, sins of omission, and sins of commission. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This step 4 was an honest reckoning with the worst parts of ourselves. And since the patients there were for alcohol and drug addiction, they could often buffer some of their offenses with a caveat that they'd been drunk or high. Some of their failings were just the result of being flawed human beings. We often don't live up to who we want to be. That was a tough step. And then there was the next one. Step 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. It's bad enough to admit some of these things to yourself. Now the patients were told that they needed to share them, all of them, with another living person. And this is where the chaplains came in. So the chaplains at Hazelden were given special training so that we would be able to listen to people's very worst stuff without judgment. It takes a particular skill to do that, but certainly chaplains were the only ones who could do that. But there was a reason we used the chaplains, and that was because all of us were mandated reporters. So only within the context of a predetermined confessional could people say anything that they needed to say and have it stay with just the person receiving it. And I would tell this to the patients so that during this bit of time, anything that you say to me will stay with me. Some things, if you tell it to me outside of this situation, I would have to report. So of course, people made really good use of that time and said things that they had never told another soul and probably never would. And just to sort of allay the ethical concerns that this would bring up, we did not just listen, but part of the work that we did was to also talk with people and help counsel them about what do they need to do with this? How can they clean up messes? So it wasn't just offering an absolution, but it was also, what do you do next? And within the 12-step program, there's a step further down the line, and that is step 8, which is make a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure some or others. So as chaplains, we heard some pretty awful stories. I've often thought that this is what the sacrament of confession was supposed to be within religion. For someone to come and sit in a room with another human being and say, here it is, this is the worst that I've got, and have that other person stay in the room with you. Not get up and go running out screaming or not shake their finger in your face and judge you, but to accept it. And often to remind you that you are still a lovable, worthwhile human being. I think that's how confession should be. And it often proved to be a very healing experience for our patients. Most people, if they're honest, have instances in their life that they aren't proud of. Most people have regrets. And in the moment, we do the best we can. Later, when we have more information or skill or a different perspective, we wish we would have done things differently. Daniel Pink, a thinker and author, and his team set up the American Regret Project and the World Regret Survey. And this collection of more than 16,000 regrets from people in 105 countries forms the largest data pool ever collected about what humans regret. Pink has a new book, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. Oh, there's my tea. He, along with other scientists who have joined this research, postulate that spending time examining our regrets offers us a way to move beyond them. Ignoring them, or proudly declaring that I have no regrets, robs us of valuable information. The idea of no regrets doesn't mean living with courage. It means living without reflection. Regret is an emotion, and it's negative. It's a stomach-churning feeling when you look back and you feel bad because of some decision that you made, some action you took, some action you didn't take. Regret is when you look back and wish it hadn't been that way. It is different from just guilt or disappointment, because the thing about regret is it's our own fault. We can't point the finger at anybody else. Regret is because of what we did or did not do, and that's the kicker. Of all the things that we feel sad about or wish that we had turned out differently, we only regret those that involve our own agency, where we did or did not do whatever it was that resulted in a negative outcome. Of the two main sources of remorse, what we did and what we didn't do, there's far more remorse about what we didn't do. Because often we can make some sort of correction to actions that we took. But when we didn't do something, that's much, much harder to correct. One of the benefits about looking at our regrets was involved in those 5 steps that I did years ago. Our regrets point to our values. We get some clarity about what really matters to us. So Paula Davis, another social scientist, has put together and laid out really nicely 4 major types of regret. There's foundational regrets. We fail to be responsible or disciplined or forward-thinking about our future. We didn't do the work, put in the time, create the good habits that would have benefited us down the road. A lot of financial, education, and health-related regrets fall in that category. Boldness regrets. The chances we didn't take, the love we didn't pursue, the risks and the discomforts we avoided. We wonder how things might have been if we'd only made that bold move, let our feelings be known, traveled more, and the inaction regrets outnumber the action regrets 2 to 1. Moral regrets. We know that we didn't do the right thing. We took the low road. We bullied or cheated or lied or stole, or we didn't speak up when we know we should. And while this makes up only about 10% of people's regrets, these are often the most personal and painful. And many of these failings are from much younger days, and they are carried around with us for decades. We did not live like the people that we wanted to be. And connection regrets. These are the people and animals and places that we neglected. They matter to us, and they help establish our sense of wholeness. And the majority of the regrets that land here are, I wish I'd reached out. Many of you know that I am now a hospice chaplain. And when people come to the end of their days, the things they wish that they had done differently about their lives tends to fall into 6 different categories. They're sorry they didn't live true to themselves. They tried to live someone else's life. They kicked themselves for working so hard and missing out on what was really important. They're sad that they didn't express their feelings and let themselves be known. They mourn that they didn't stay connected to family and friends. They lament not getting out of bad relationships earlier. And they are bereft that they didn't let themselves be happier. When I searched regrets and religion, I found that far too many people felt regret that they had wasted years on some religion that didn't suit them. It repressed their personality and their sexuality. It fostered feelings of inferiority, superiority, separation. Instead of feeding the soul and building integrity, they regret that religion had done more harm than good. Conversely, there are those who wish that they had turned to their faith earlier and invested themselves deeper. They found that their religion called them to be better people, to treat the earth and other beings with greater love and respect. They wish they had taken it seriously sooner. Most of the social scientists stress the need to own, explore, and dig into our regrets. A number of scientists and therapists have suggested steps that people can take to address their regrets. And mostly it's just pretty common sense. Allow yourself to feel, have some compassion for yourself, look at ways you have grown, ask yourself if you need to make amends. Pink even encourages people to write a regret resume. The dealing with regret hacks that I discovered were practical and direct. And much of the focus on dealing with regret rests on uncovering what we can learn from them and doing better in the future. As a religious professional, I was also struck by what I did not see. For all the self-exploration and intentionality about these big and small missteps, I didn't see anything about guilt, shame, and grief. And the concept of sin was completely avoided. A couple of authors did talk about self-forgiveness. When we talk about regrets, it's not as simple as analyzing what went wrong and making an action plan to do better. Some of these remorseful events burrow into our bones and get lodged in our psyche and distort our soul. Perhaps that's another reason why Hazelden used the chaplains for the 5 steps. Guilt is a fact when looking at our unfavorable past. Guilt might also be a feeling, and sometimes people don't feel guilty. But guilt is attached to the places and the times that we faltered. Intentional or not, we caused harm. And regret indicates that on some level, our own behavior harmed us. Others might have been harmed. Guilt is a consequence of our failure. And sometimes our guilt requires us that we make appropriate amends. Do what we can to clean up any mess that we made. Shame is different than guilt. Shame is always an emotion and a judgment. It whispers or it blares that the problem has gone beyond our behavior and that we ourselves is what is wrong. Guilt acknowledges that we have failed. Shame claims that we are a failure. I've preached about shame before, and I just want to touch on one aspect of it in today's sermon. In order for shame to be healed, Somebody needs to know your secret. You can't work on shame alone using notebooks and worksheets. There's an old spiritual maxim: you're only as sick as your secrets. Any regret that carries shame must be shared. And this is sort of where that telling another human living person comes in. Someone who will honestly hear your regret, who's safe, who won't minimize it and brush it away, or heap on judgment, or try to top what you did by telling you something they did that they think is even worse. But shame leaves when we know that we are still connected and cared for, even when we've told somebody. So shame only is healed when we've reestablished connection, and that only happens when we tell somebody else and are received back into the fold. Remember, I told you that many moral regrets are carried for decades? So often, patients telling me the 5 steps had some moral failure when they were young. Perhaps they were mean to the already ostracized kid on the bus, or they stole the favorite treasure from some relative's home. And they were proof enough of their failings as a human being that they just went on to believe it. And that regret could become right-sized and released after it was shared, those individual failings. Well, suggesting that we forgive ourselves is certainly true. It just gets complicated. Forgiveness is a process. It's rarely a decision. And before we can forgive someone, including ourselves, first we have to grieve. When we examine our regrets, it's important to pay attention to what has been lost. An injury always carries some sort of a cost. This is where regret and sin become entangled. In our modern English, we really only have one word, sin, and it's loaded. The ancients had many words, and there's a continuum of dealing with this issue of human offenses. In Judean Christian theologies, there are loads of different words that talk about how we feel. So one of the used words for sin is an old archery term. It means missing the mark. You were aiming for the bullseye, and you hit the saddle that was 7 yards to the right. That was a sin. There's the failure of falling short of someone, and the bond between people is broken. There's ignorance of the law, messing up on a ritual. And along with the unintended failings, there's also weakness and being overcome. There's flat out rebellion. There's even generational misdeeds, when the sins of the parents are passed on to the children. So the current mental health focus on generational trauma isn't really new. Failure has ripples. When we count the cost of our actions or inactions, it matters. And we have to ask ourselves, is my regret based on an honest mistake, ignorance, or a deliberate desire to harm? Was it founded in a mistake, a misstep, or murder one? We acknowledge and own what our misdeed has cost us, and then we can begin the work of grieving. And while forgiveness is a broad topic, I don't think we can fully forgive even ourselves until we fully grieve. My favorite definition of forgiveness is giving up the hope for a different past. That's particularly fitting in relation to our regrets. Returning to my Hazelden story, patients were encouraged to do fourth and fifth steps periodically. So these steps were to be repeated as needed. They weren't a one and done instruction. And patients would ask the chaplain, do I have to repeat all of this? Do I have to go through every mistake I ever made all over again? And we would answer no. Instead, share whatever it is that is bothering you now. If you have to talk about the same regret from the summer between 3rd and 4th grade, chances are that you haven't metabolized it yet. There's still work to do. However, if you've processed your regrets, learned from them, grieved over them, and integrated them, let them be. While our goal is to gain what we can from our failures and move on, I can assure you that we will have new regrets as we go. Earlier, I mentioned that our regrets show us what we value. And judging from the majority of regrets from the World Regret Survey, what is most important to us is what we understand is necessary for a good life. Stability, a chance to grow and learn, doing the right thing, love, and connection. And finally, in praise of regrets, don't keep them to yourself. Not only is there healing in telling the right people, a burden is lifted when we learn that we aren't the only ones. Our failures aren't unique to us. And that one of the reasons we share them is so we can learn from the mistake of others, and also that we can find out that this is common humanity. We aren't unique in our failings. And we can avoid some pitfalls if we listen. May we be blessed by our regrets and share them generously with others. May we remember our common humanity and be grateful for those who sometimes show us what to avoid. May we experience acceptance, forgiveness, healing, and growth, all in praise of our regrets. Amen and amen. So this part, which I also love about UU services, is also worship. It's what are your thoughts? What do you believe? What are your experiences? What do you have to say and share about this topic? So I believe folks that are out there at home are invited to join in this discussion as well. But I would love to hear.
I was thinking, how did you deal with having to listen to disturbing things, and is it one of those jobs that a person just simply cannot do for a long period of time? I mean, yeah, absorbing someone's pain in a way.
Mm-hmm. There certainly were things that I needed to do for myself, just in terms of self-care. That's a lovely question, thank you. And one of the things I noticed was that I could listen to just about anything if there was regret connected with it. So even when it was the most horrible of things, if the people really were sorry about it, I could hear it. When I heard people who would also tell me about the most horrible things, but do it in a way that they were the victim, those didn't sit well. And I had to do special work to get rid of that ick. But if they really were sorry, I could hear it. Yeah. Thank you.
It's amazing how seemingly minor little conflict or mistreatment or whatever, way back 50 years ago can still make you cringe a little bit, you know? So, kind of like, let it go, come on. You know?
Those are the ones to share. And I actually speak that from experience. I have one particular memory of something that I was just, oh my goodness, for probably 35 years. It was just this thing that I carried. And I shared it with somebody. Actually, I had told you folks about that story in one of my sermons long ago.
We forgot.
Which is why I can re-preach the same sermons if I ever need to. But when I told somebody, and they actually gave me a different perspective on it, why hadn't I told somebody a long time ago? But a small thing, and it just kept niggling. And I believe we all have them.
Yeah, because there's probably so many more that we don't realize.
Yeah.
I've always thought that one of the best ways of parenting is to share your regrets with your children, but it has got to be the hardest. But the way I figured out is, we're all going to make mistakes, but if you share your regrets with your kids, that's one mistake they may not make. It kind of reduces their list of stuff.
It does. And it models for them what it can look like. To own it. And to put it out there and trust that it will still be received. Which is a huge step.
Yeah.
Are there any folks online that want to share? I know that we'll have a time for some conversation after the service. Sometimes I hear things then. And I also know sometimes it takes a while for things to sort of muddle through and process. So if people are really quiet after sermon, I just assume it's because you're thinking.
You've given us a lot to think about.
Yeah. That's what it is. It's certainly not that I bored you to tears. From one of our UU ancestors, Henry David Thoreau. Make the most of your regrets. Never smother your sorrow, but tend it and cherish it until it comes to have a separate and integral interest. To regret deeply is to live afresh. And if you would join me in extinguishing our chalice.
Let me get it on the screen here.
Okay.
Take me just a second. And I have to share it. Let's see, where's the share? Okay. Somehow I got to get it over there and then also click the share button. Share screen. There we go.
Remember when we didn't have technology service?
Oh, yeah.
Or we had some, but
Remember driving out in a car with no phone?
can we do that today? I panic when I leave my car.
Okay, there we go.
Alrighty.
We extinguish this chalice with the knowledge that even when our hearts are broken by our own failure or the failure of others cutting into our lives, even when we have done all we can and life is still broken, there is universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will.